Hello, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about solving radical equations. What a radical equation is, it's an equation that has a radical or square root involved in it. And we're going to talk about how we're going to handle dealing with this square root when it arises. There are going to be certain steps that we're going to want to follow as we're going to be solving these equations. The first thing we're going to want to do is isolate the square root. What that means is we want to get rid of everything that's on the outside of that square root. Any additions or subtractions, multiplications or divisions. We want to get those onto the other side of the equation. We want to get this square root by itself and isolate it. After that, we're going to square both sides. And what the squaring of both sides will do, it will get rid of the square root, because squaring and square roots cancel each other out. We will then solve the remaining equation to come up with what other x values or m values or variables that we can come up with. But this last step is going to be new. We're going to have to check our solutions, because sometimes we're going to find some of our solutions just don't work, and then we have to throw them out. So let's take a look at our first equation. Here we have negative 7 times the square root of negative 8 minus x plus 3, and it equals negative 11. What we're going to want to do is get this square root by itself. We got a choice to get rid of negative 7 or plus 3. We always like to get rid of addition first. So let's subtract 3 from both sides. We're going to subtract 3 from both sides, and then that'll leave us with negative 7 square roots of negative 8 minus x equals negative 14. Then we have to get rid of this negative 7. Well, since it's negative 7 times the square root, we undo times by dividing it. We divide negative 7 on both sides. Now, this negative 7 and this negative 7 cancels out. We do not divide the negative 7 inside. So we're left with the square root of negative 8 minus x equals negative 14 divided by negative 7 is positive 2. Now we're into our step 2. We're going to want to square both sides so we can get rid of that square root. So when we square this side and we square the right side, don't forget to square both sides. So the square root and the square cancels out, so you're left with negative 8 minus x equals 4. Then we're going to add 8 to both sides to get rid of the negative 8, which gives us negative x equals 12. And if the opposite of x equals 12, then x better equal negative 12. And we get an answer. Now, don't forget, we got one more step. We have to make sure our solution actually works. So what do we do to check it? We take it and we plug it back into the original equation. So take our check, and let's separate our work here. Negative 7 times the square root of negative 8 minus our x value is negative 12. So plug in negative 12 for x. Don't forget that it's minus negative now. Plus 3 equals negative 11. We're not solving. We want to simplify this side to see if it turns out to be equal to negative 11. So orders of operations say do inside any groups, and we have a group inside the square root. So negative 7 times negative 8 plus 12 plus 3. Negative 7 times the square root of negative 8 plus 12 is 4 plus 3. Negative 7 times the square root of 4 is 2 plus 3. Negative 7 times 2 is negative 14 plus 3, which is negative 11. And isn't that what we wanted it to equal? It is. So guess what? Our answer is, in fact, x equals negative 12. Let's move on to our next problem. Here, you notice we have two square roots. Whenever we have multiple square roots, we want to make sure that one of them is on each side. Now, you're going to see this happen where they're already on both sides, but keep that in the back of your mind. You always want the square roots on separate sides. Now, how do I get rid of this square root? I square both sides. Now, conveniently, if I square both sides, look what happens. Square here, square here. This square and the square root cancels out, and you're just left with 3m plus 33 equals that square, and this square root cancels out, and you're left with negative 7 minus m. Now, get all m's onto one side. I like to move them to this left-hand side because my m will be positive. So let's add m here and add m here. And while we're at it, let's move this constant, this number, onto the other side. So let's subtract 33. So this minus m and m cancel out. The 33 and the negative 33 cancel out. 3m plus m is 4m equals negative 7 minus 33 is negative 40. And finally, divide by 4, and we get m equals negative 10. So now let's go back and check our answer. Now we have to plug it into both places for m. You notice we have m on both sides. So the square root of 3 times negative 10 plus 33. Now let's neaten this up here. Equals the square root of negative 7 minus negative 10. We want to make sure the left and right hand side turn out to be the same thing. So 3 times negative 10, negative 30, plus 33. And if we put that together, we get the square root of 3. It's okay that it's still in the square root. We just want to make sure the right hand side turns out to be the square root of 3. So we have negative 7 minus negative 10, or plus 10. And if we add negative 7 and 10, we get the square root of 3. And guess what? They still work out. So m equaling negative 10 is our complete answer there. Let's move on and try one more of these. Uh-oh, a fraction. Well, don't worry about that. You notice we still have a square root equal to square root. Okay? So let's go ahead and square the left side and square the right side. The square root and the square cancel out. So you're left with x divided by 7 equals this square root and square cancels out, and you're left with 80 minus x. Now you're just left with a regular equation you did way back in Algebra 1. So let's get rid of this division here. So let's multiply both sides by 7. Now, this is two terms on the right-hand side, so we got to make sure that we're going to distribute that 7 through when we actually do the multiplication. So this 7 and this 7 cancel out, and you're left with x equals 7 times 80 is 560, and 7 times negative x is negative 7x. Add 7x to move all the x's onto one side. 8x equals 560, and when we divide by 8, we get x equals 70. Large number, but you know what? We're mathematicians. We can handle this. So let's check our answer. The square root of 70 is x now. So 70 divided by 7. Does that equal the square root of 80 minus 70? So what's 70 divided by 7? It's 10. So the left-hand side is the square root of 10. And 80 minus 70 is the square root of 10. And look, these are both the same again. So our answer is, in fact, x equals 70. We got one more to check out. Let's see how this goes. So you notice we have a square root on this left-hand side, and the right-hand side, no square root. But you notice we also have another variable here. Well, we still need to get rid of that square root. How do we do it? You're right. We're going to square both sides. So square the left-hand side and square the right-hand side. The square root and the square cancels out. And on the right-hand side, the square root, and then, oh, there is no square root here. There's nothing to cancel out, which means this square is still there. So that's x squared. I don't know if you guys remembered, we handled equations that had x squared before. We can either solve by factoring. We could solve by quadratic formula. There's many options. Let's see if factoring works. In order to do factoring or quadratic formula, no matter what, we got to get everything into one side. I like my x squared to be positive, so let's move the 90 over. And let's add the x to move it over. The left-hand side becomes 0, and the right-hand side becomes x squared. We can't add x to it, so it's plus x minus 90. Now, if you remember, there's a nice 1 in front, even though we don't write it. But we want to come up with two numbers that multiply to give us negative 90 and add up to give us the number right in front here. Well, what number is that? You're right. There's a 1 there as well. So we want to add up to give us 1. What two numbers multiply to give us negative 90 and add up to give us 1? That's right. positive 10, and negative 9. So we can factor this into x plus 10 and x minus 9. We have two factors that if we multiply them equal to 0. So we can now set each one of those equal to 0 and solve them independently of each other. So if we subtract 10 here, we get x equals negative 10. And if we add 9 here, we get x equals 9. We have two answers. Now, remember what we got to do? Our last step is to check. Let's go ahead and check this last problem. So, we have two numbers to check, so we have to check them completely separately. So, let's check negative 10 first. So, 90 minus negative 10, does that equal? Got to make sure to put negative 10 in here as well. Square root of 90 plus 10, square root of 100. And what's the square root of 100? What do you square to get 100? It is 10 or negative 10, but you don't see a plus or minus, which means it's only positive 10 here. And if we bring this down, does 10 equal negative 10? No, it doesn't. You know what that means? X equals negative 10 is not an answer. It's called an extraneous solution. It's an answer that's created when we squared both sides. It works for this equation right here, but does not work for the original. Let's see whether or not 9 is a solution or an extra solution. So let's plug it into the same equation. 90 minus 9, does that equal 9? So the square root of 81, the square root of 81 is 9. Does 9 equal 9? It does. Ding, 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 ding. That means that x equals 9 is the only solution to this equation. Now I know what you're thinking. Could we have two solutions? Yes, you could. They could have both worked out. In this case, x equals negative 10 didn't work. Could it have been no solutions? That is another possibility. You might come up with two answers that are both extraneous solutions, and if they both don't work, you would have just said there is no solution. But in this case, there was one solution, and it was x equals 9. Hopefully you enjoyed this, and it'll help you out when you're doing your homework. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.